says going live. I'm going to close this. Okay, there we go. So it's going. So ladies, and I believe it's going. I hope it's going. And if it's not going, well, then that's live as well. Captivating cases in rabbinic responsa. Listen in on the surprising practical questions your ancestors asked rabbis across Jewish history. And last week, we focused on the kinds of questions people asked and the kinds of people that asked these questions, right? That was an interesting thing. We asked very interesting dilemmas. We approached some very interesting dilemmas. And we, instead of getting into the nitty-gritty on the answers that the rabbis gave, we spoke about the faith and courage of the kinds of people that were asking some of the most gut-wrenching questions. For example, we spoke about a father in Auschwitz who was trying to make the most ethical decision in the most difficult of circumstances. So a very difficult, horrible story. But the truth is, because all stories in Auschwitz are horrible stories, let's be honest, but the incredibly amazing kinds of people that ask these incredible kinds of questions. So that was the focus of last week's class. It's open. Cynthia's here. No. Just... Yeah, and it's open. She's asking someone to open for her, but I unlocked it. It is open. Do you think she's going to figure out on her own that it's open? We hope. Oh, great. Thank you so much. Absolutely. Okay. So last week, ladies and gentlemen, we focused on the kinds of people that asked the questions. In this week, we're going to focus a little bit on the kinds of people that answered the questions. Okay? And we're going to look at some of the factors that go into dealing with the questions that get asked from the perspective of the rabbis throughout the ages that were called upon to answer these questions. And it's very interesting. My son, Menachem, is in rabbinical school right now. He's busy doing his, not yet, about 6 months away from getting his smicha. He's about 6 months away from getting his ordination. And so this morning I came across one of the things in this book. I sent him a screenshot. I sent him a photo of something in the book. As a young aspiring rabbi, you should hear this stuff. You understand? There's certain things, there's certain messages over here that the rabbis need to hear. And it tells us a little bit about the character of the rabbis, the integrity, the humility, and that's part of what makes a good rabbi. Well, that's interesting. You say not having all the answers, but these were the kinds of people that were really called upon to answer some of the most difficult questions. So when you're in that role of having to answer the most difficult questions, so how do you do it? What's the process? So we're going to deal with some interesting topics today. Topics today will include the rising of the Nile and the rabbinic search for the source of the Nile. Did you know about that one? The rabbinic search for the source of the Nile, an expedition. No, I'm joking. There was a little bit. We'll see. We're going to tell the story about the chicken that didn't have a heart. Have you heard the story about the chicken without a heart? Sounds like a joke, right? There's got to be a good punchline to that one. We'll deal with another chicken issue. A new species of chicken, the Cypriot chicken, arrived in Europe.
A turkey?
No, not a turkey. A chicken from Cyprus. Is it the same thing as a chicken from Germany? We're going to discover that question in a second and analyze how some of these questions were dealt with and why they were such important questions in today's class. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's open up our books to lesson 2. If you're at home and you don't have a book yet, please send me an email and I'll make sure to get a book to you. I apologize if you didn't get one yet. We'll get everybody their books, certainly by the end of the course. No, I'm joking. We'll get them to you by next week. So I know that, Lauren, we've got to send you one. Bob, Rachel has one here. I don't remember if you like to have one or two, but we'll get you books. Everybody's getting books. Phil needs to get a book. Whoever else needs books, we've got books for you. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, please turn to chapter 2. The first lesson on chapter 2 is on page 49, the introduction. Sorry, the first page of it is on page 49. The introduction there says, Torah in the trenches, the hands-on reality of halachic decision-making. How's that picture? Do you see that picture? Isn't that interesting? So it says, well, it looks a bit like a chamsa. It's a hand. It's got chickens. Are those roosters? It's like Chagall almost. You know what I mean? But it says a document on calendar calculation from Tlemcen, Algeria in 1804. It's a rabbi or someone who was trying to put together, draw up a calendar, which is fascinating. Interesting art that you sometimes see in these documents. Anyway, today's class says rabbis don't rule in a vacuum. The response of this lesson showed how Torah law meets real-world facts and scientific insights, bridging sacred texts and the complexity of everyday life. And we've got another rooster on the next page. For some reason, roosters seem to be the theme of today's class. Unless that's a chicken, I don't know. It's a chicken or a rooster. We'll leave it up to you guys to figure it out. But the point of today's class is also that rabbis are trained in Torah. What happens when they're called upon to make determinations about the physical world and physical scientific discoveries and things like this? Now, lesson 6 of this class is about future technologies and how rabbis are dealing with them. For example, artificial intelligence and different things. We're actually condensing the 6-week class into 5. So as the course unfolds, you'll discover how that's getting done. But we are going to talk about future technologies. So this class today is very important in setting the stage on how some of those things will later be dealt with. So let's start with the rising of the Nile. But first, the screen says like this. So, and this is a very, very important principle. Every rabbi knows that in order to answer a question properly, you need something called siyata dishmaya, which means help from heaven, right? And the need to, the humility that comes along with the fact that maybe you don't have all the answers. If you turn to the appendix for one moment, on page 87, this is, last week we quoted the Rashba, one of the most important 12th, 13th, 14th century rabbis. He once wrote, I have received your important question. If I have delayed my response until now, attributed to the great burden of my responsibilities, I answered as heaven has shown me. In other words, he's invoking heaven. There's a very interesting letter that was written by the Chassam Sofer, the next one on page 88. The Chassam Sofer, Rabbi Moshe Sofer, was one of the most important rabbis in Hungary in the 19th century, 18th, 19th century. From all of the above, he was asked a very, very difficult question. And there's a very, very famous letter that he wrote. He says, from all of the above, it initially seemed to me that this woman would be permitted to marry without receiving a bill of divorce. Now, this is obviously, I don't know exactly what the question was, but a woman was, it's a story of an aguna. An aguna is a woman who's married to a man and needs to get a get. And for some reason, in this particular case, there's a difficulty in getting the get. The husband, in this case, may have died, but there's no body, or something like that. It could have been, I'm not exactly sure what the case was over here. And the question is, at which point do you determine that the woman is not married anymore? I don't know if he had to say the marriage never took place in the first, I don't know exactly the circumstances of what this question was. But he said, my gut, when I got the question, I said, she can get remarried, which is a big deal, by the way, because to allow a woman to get remarried without getting a get means that it's a big deal to say that the divorce is unnecessary for whatever the circumstances are. And he was ready to give a bold ruling in that respect. He says, however, my idea, in other words, my thoughts on the topic, my novel, what he means over here when he says my idea, he means my novel legal reasoning, right? These are great lawyers, judges. My idea and its evidence arose in my mind immediately upon seeing the question, and yet I was prevented by heaven from completing this tshuva, this answer, for over 10 weeks. I've been meaning on writing my opinion, and I've been delayed. I wrote a little, but then interruptions arose, delaying me for a day, then for days, then for 10 days. And this happened repeatedly. Finally, I said to myself, surely this delay is significant. Something is amiss here. As a result, I resolved wholeheartedly not to rely on my judgment in this matter. It's as if I had never expressed the above thoughts at all. I'm thinking maybe heaven is telling me my answer is wrong. Nevertheless, I'm sending this. Now, he was the leading judge of his time. So probably what happened is a regional rabbi must have addressed the question to him. So he writes back, and he writes like this, he says, I am sending this answer to you as I do not wish to withhold Torah knowledge. These are my thoughts. This is my opinion, but it's not a judgment. I'm ready to give you some thoughts, but not a judgment. Review, analyze, and delve into the issue, and you will earn a reward for your effort. However, regarding practical application, act according to your conclusion, whether it aligns with my reasoning or follows another rationale. Do not rely on me at all. I do not wish for any responsibility. With this, I conclude with blessings. So he's not trying to he's not trying to pass the buck necessarily, essentially, because he did give very bold and courageous judgments on other issues. But in this case, he sort of feels that heaven's not with him. And it's an interesting perspective. We're just going to get a drink. That's interesting. It's a good point. This is the second one we've read where he doesn't want to where they don't want to give answers. In other words, it's not easy to give answers. They're not looking to, when you get asked, sometimes they have to, and they do give answers. But it's easy to understand why people today, everybody has an opinion before they know the facts, right? These are people that know the facts and therefore don't want to give opinions. It's difficult to give opinions. So there's a lesson for there. There's probably a lesson. So the lesson over here is a lesson of humility, a lesson of people understanding and also recognizing that hope from heaven is crucial to the entire process. And it also gives you a sense of how these rabbis are incredibly God-fearing. And there were certain, I'll give you an example. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein was one of the leading authorities in American Jewry after the Holocaust, till he passed away, I think, in the late 90s. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein answered some of the most difficult questions that came up in modernity in America after the war. And very often, he was quite lenient on some of his rulings. Very often, he was quite almost liberal in his rulings, if I had to use the word, but very lenient on some things. And he was accepted primarily because in his own private life, he was known to be an incredible, God-fearing, strict person. In other words, people trusted him that he wasn't just, it's very easy, you know, when I was in rabbinical school, they told us, it's very easy to say everything's treif. Do you know what that means? Very easy to say everything's not kosher. Okay? You don't know it takes a lot more courage to say something is kosher. Okay. On the other hand, if you say that everything's kosher and you live your life in a way that everything's kosher, then we can't rely. If everything's kosher, then how good are your opinions anyway, right? You're not serious about it. But if you're really God-fearing, then you really know the law, then your job is not to say treif. Your job is to try to find a way to say kosher. And if you can, great. But if there's no way to do it, then you just can't. And that's also sometimes what the rabbi will say is, I can't find a way to say kosher here, but maybe somebody else can. I don't have the knowledge I can't see the angle. But we want to, so it's an interesting perspective. So it's part of this discussion of trying to find out the kinds of ways rabbis address these kinds of questions. So a rabbi who comes out with every day, everything's kosher, everything's kosher, everything's kosher, eventually people turn around and say, well, that rabbi's not particularly, they're not serious. They just want to say everything. They're not that. But somebody who has that balance to be able to uphold the law and at the same time try to work the law to help people in difficult circumstances, that's with a fear of heaven and a humility as part of the process. That's kind of the sweet spot you're trying to find over here in these kinds of things. Yes.
Ask a question you couldn't answer it. Who would you turn to?
It happens to me every day. Every day I'm getting questions I can't answer. So it's a very good question. No, you can look at it. It's true. The truth is, yes, you look it up on Google, you try to study it. The first thing you try to do is find the answer. If it's do research. If it's an easy question, great. If it's a more complicated question. So I have a whole list of different rabbis that I go to for different questions. Sometimes they'll know the answer. This is halachic questions, right? Sometimes they'll know the answer. Sometimes these people say, I don't know the answer. If it's a more complicated question, it gets elevated, right? Until you get to, it's very rare to come up with an entirely new question that doesn't. It's no such, there are people, so it's an interesting thing. There are certain people that are considered, there's no one. In Judaism, there never was one. But there are certain real experts in Jewish law that specialize in things. So some questions are easy. When it comes to things like kosher and not kosher, those are easy questions, not so much on the line. Where it gets really difficult and tricky is when you start getting into complicated medical procedures, for example, where these are the areas where things start to get more complicated. Or sometimes you have issues, like you have an issue with a get. And then there's a whole process. There's people that specialize in things, and that's complicated. We'll get to more complicated stuff later in the course. We'll start a little bit today. Okay, but let's go back and see. Okay, so now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to read a text from the Radbaz. So who was the Radbaz? Page 51 in the margin. It's important to know who we're dealing with. Noted halachist. He lived from 1479 to 1573. So just to put it into perspective, he's a contemporary, he's a little bit younger than Columbus, right? Noted halachist, Radbaz was born in Spain and immigrated to Tzfat in Israel upon the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492. In 1513, he's probably the same age as Columbus. In 1513, he moved to Egypt and served as rabbi, judge, and head of the yeshiva in Cairo. He also ran many successful business ventures and was independently wealthy. In 1553, he returned to Tzfat, where he would later be buried. He authored what would later become a classic commentary to Maimonides' Code of Law and wrote many halakhic responses, of which more than 10,000 are extant. So you hear that 10,000 letters that he wrote on halakhic issues have still been recorded, and he's a very, very important source in this process. Extant means available, in existence. It's the opposite of extinct, I guess. Okay, page 51. These are the questions he was asked. This is a record of a big dilemma that faced Egyptian Jewry during his time. Is the Nile's annual swelling due to rainwater or underground springs? We've been inquiring about this in a casual way of honest, non-Jewish traders who come from Ethiopia. They don't know we require this information for testimony, so it's unlikely that they are lying to us. They report that in southern Ethiopia, there are torrential rains for 3 or 4 months, so heavy that no one leaves their homes due to the downpours. These rains create large streams and lakes which flow and empty into the Nile, causing it to rise and swell. I also inquired of non-Jewish scholars, and they all agreed that the Nile's rise is due to abundant rainfall. I further examined their books, and it is written in them that the cause is rain or melting snow. It is also written in their books that some of the earthly kings sent expeditions to explore this river and to determine its source. The explorers reported that the river originates from a mountain called Jabal al-Kamer, which means mountain of the moon, and that its swelling is due to heavy rains. Okay, so you see the Radbaz is commenting and deciding and coming to the conclusion that the Nile's annual flooding is due to rain and not underground springs.
That's relevant to what?
Okay, so that's exactly the question. Good question. That's exactly the question. Why is this relevant? So we're going to see soon why it was very important. He's writing his answer, yeah. He's writing his answer. Now, why does he need to do this was Josh's question. So we're going to see that in Jewish law, with making a mikveh, very good, Gila, it makes a big difference if the Nile floods because of rains or because of increased water flow from an underground spring. It's going to make a big difference on how you deal with the laws of mikveh in Egypt. Now, the interesting thing is like this. There was a myth in Egypt at the time, a very popular myth, that the Nile flooded because of an underground spring. And they would have a whole ritual where they would go to the Nile before the flooding, and they would tap on the soil, and they would measure the density of the soil, and based on the density of the soil, they would calculate exactly how much water to expect in the flooding of the Nile the coming year from this underground spring that was going to, there was this whole process that they did it. A very scientific process by which they discussed and predicted the flooding of the Nile, almost as scientific as what's done in Pennsylvania in America on Groundhog's Day, okay? But there was this very popular notion that it came from an underground spring. Actually, as I'm telling you this now, when the mikveh was built at Agudath Shalom, the new mikveh, they brought in a rabbi from Brooklyn, Rabbi Weiss, to be the consultant to help do it according to Jewish law. And when he was coming, so I remember I went to go and meet him and to see the process and how they were planning on doing it. And he gave a little tour of, at that point, the mikveh wasn't even built yet, but it was a conceptual, it was being built. And he was explaining all the incredible halachic thinking that went into the question. And I asked him a question, which is that we have in this part of the world, the water table is quite high. And could we tap into underground waters as opposed to rainwater from above to fill the mikvahs? The way it works in the mikvahs today in America and in many places of the world is you have an immersion pool where people actually dip in the mikvah. And then next to the immersion pool, there's another pool, which is pure rainwater, and the two waters join, making it all into one pool. And that's how you get involved in the rainwater. So when they were talking about the collection of rain, I asked him, can we tap into spring water from underground? And he explained to me that the water underground here in Connecticut is most likely not spring water, but actually rainwater with underground rivers that then go underground and collect in these things. And it makes a big difference if you're dealing with, to deal with spring water and river water is and rainwater is a whole different type of law. And we're going to see how this was, it's the same question that was coming to the people in the Nile River in the 1500s. It was the same. But there was this popular myth that the water under the ground in the Nile, the water, the flooding was coming from a spring. And they now needed to determine, is it a spring or is it not a spring? So here's the important detail over here. The rabbi understood we're not going to find the answer to this question necessarily in the Talmud. It's not answered there. They didn't know. So he had to go to explorers, to experts in rainwater and these things. And you're seeing a fascinating thing here where the halachic authorities have to turn to outside experts to get their information. So the first level of humility is they need the help of God. The second level of humility is sometimes you need to go to the scientists and the explorers to find the answers to your questions. And that's the process that we're seeing him over here, right? He's consulting the wise men of Egypt and the explorers and their texts and going outside of it.
Testimony. What kind of testimony?
Where exactly are you looking?
Right there.
What page? Yeah, at the bottom of the page is like this. So here comes the question. It's an interesting question. Today, if you have a court case, so both sides get expert witnesses to testify on their behalf. You pay an expert witness, they testify on your behalf, and they tell you exactly what your case needs to hear, right? You hire the expert witness who's going to give you the answer that you want to hear. So here, he's turning to expert witnesses, but they have to make sure that they have no ulterior motive. So he's saying the witnesses don't know why we're asking them the question. That's the important question. The people that are talking about the Nile don't know what's at stake for our community. If they know what's at stake in our community, then they may have an ulterior motive. So we have to be able to know the facts. Well, maybe they're in the construction business and it would make a difference to them. Okay, let's go on to the next. Yes. It doesn't necessarily have to be rainwater, but we're going to deal with this in a second. It could be a spring water. It could be spring water, it could be rainwater. It has to be natural water. How you collect it and how you we'll deal with that a little bit later. We're going to get into the details of this a little bit soon. But then the second question we're going to deal with today is the story of the heartless hen. Now, this story blew up East Germany. It wasn't yet known as Germany. It was with Rabbi Yonason Eibschitz. Now, he is one of the most interesting characters in Jewish history, but we're not going to tell his whole story today. But let's see what it says over here in the margin. Talmudist, so 1690 to 1764. Talmudist, authority on Jewish law, and Kabbalist. Recognized during his youth as a prodigy in Talmud, Rabbi Eibschitz was appointed rabbinical magistrate of Prague and later rabbi of Metz. In 1750, he was elected rabbi of Altona, Hamburg, and Wandsbek, which was one of the most important rabbinic posts in the world. In 1763, he published Kareti Upaleti, a halachic commentary on part of the Code of Jewish Law. After his death, several of his works and teachings were published, including Yaris Dvash, a collection of his sermons. So he tells the story, a very important thing regarding the heartless hen. I wrote through the veteran and exceptional scholar, Rabbi Henich of Hell. Is that how it's pronounced? Nope. In Hebrew, you can see it's Hali. That's how I know it's pronounced. Rabbi Henich of Hali. He says, I wrote through him to submit on my behalf a question referred to as a responsum to the professors in Hali. In Hali, there was a university, and he had a very important question that he needed to ask the professors of anatomy in Hali. Here is the exact text of their response. It teaches us how much caution is required when issuing halachic rulings. And this is what they wrote. And guess what? They found evidence of this in the archives of the university in Hali. So it's not only here, you can actually find reference to this in their university archives as well. Having received 2 inquiries, the reason for which we do not know, again, it's important that they don't know what's at stake in the question. They were just asked a question in anatomy. We were asked, as the physicians of this institution, to investigate and provide answers based on the principles of medical science and anatomy. We convened for a session, and after careful analysis and deliberation, we reached the following response, which we present as follows, which we present below. The first question is, if any living creature can survive for some time after its heart has been removed, whether due to disease or any other cause, can a chicken live without a heart? Number 2, regarding the second question, if a bird, such as a chicken or a goose, is opened and no heart is found, can we assume that another organ has developed in place of the heart, performing its function and thereby sustaining the bird's life despite the absence of its heart? Can another limb kick in to play the role of a heart? That was a question they were asked. Why were they asked this question? Stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen. We'll get back to this soon. Number 3, the third case we're going to deal with today is the story of the Cypriot chicken. So here we've got Rabbi Naftali Chaim Horowitz, who's a rabbi originally from Europe who's now living in Israel. And he wrote a letter about something. We're going to explain why this was a big issue soon. Regarding the Cypriot chicken, I wish to inform you that I purchased a specimen in the holy city of Jerusalem and another in Izmir, in Turkey, in Smyrna. Today it's called Izmir, then it was called Smyrna, I believe. I was unable to purchase one in Cyprus itself because there are no Jews on the Greek islands and the locals do not understand our language. However, I saw that the captain brought these chickens onto the ship that sailed from Cyprus as provisions for the passengers. They were entirely identical to the chicken I later bought in Izmir, without the slightest difference in sound, appearance, or height. I offered the ship's captain 10 coins for one chicken, but he refused. The people from the Holy Land who were traveling with me on the ship advised me to buy one in Izmir, which is a day's journey from Cyprus. It is widely known that merchants transport many thousands of these chickens from Cyprus to Izmir. So I purchased the chickens. I couldn't get one in Cyprus, so I bought it in Izmir. These chickens are in the possession of my teacher and grandfather-in-law, Rabbi Chaim of Sanz, in Novi Sanz in Galicia. I took the chickens and brought them to Galicia to show my grandfather-in-law those chickens. I hope he froze them. How would they freeze a chicken in those days? Okay. So you can see the route he took. He was in Jerusalem. He traveled to Cyprus, couldn't get a chicken in Cyprus. They went to Izmir and then delivered the chicken all the way to Sanz in the Austrian Empire. right? It's quite a way to go to schlep a chicken. What's going on? Why is it so important that we bring a Cypriot chicken to Tzanz? We're going to find out in a minute. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's go back. Let's go one more case that we need to talk about. Page 62. In the 1950s, a major scandal broke out amongst the observant Jewish community all over the world. Major halachic issue came out in the 1950s. Was it permitted to travel on tzim ships across the Atlantic to Israel? In those days, passenger planes weren't common yet. If you wanted to go to Israel, you needed to go by boat. There were different ways of getting there. One of the ways was the Israeli National Shipping Company, tzim. The Israeli National Shipping Company, tzim, and many people who were going to Israel wanted to travel on the Israeli liner. It's like flying El Al today. Some people wanted specifically fly El Al. Some people want to fly anything except El Al. My daughter has a flight to come back from Israel in 2 weeks' time on Delta. Right now, I'm wishing that we had bought her the ticket on El Al, because we'll find out what happens in 2 weeks' time. So, ladies and gentlemen, the story is still unfolding. It could be. So, ladies and gentlemen, so now comes the issue of tzim. The question is, if it was an Israeli ship run by Jews, Jewish captains, to cross the Atlantic, you had to sail on Shabbos. Could you go on a ship on Shabbos that's being run by a Jew? Now, if it's being run by, if the captain is non-Jewish and the crew is non-Jewish, and you board the ship at least on a Wednesday, then you're allowed to be on that ship on Shabbos, which is why you see so many Jewish people can go on cruises today. You can be on a cruise ship over Shabbos. Not a problem to be on a cruise ship over Shabbos. As long as you follow certain rules of exactly what the halachas are, you can go on a regular cruise ship on Shabbos. The crew is not Jewish. The problem or the question became, what's the story if you have a Jewish crew running a ship on Shabbos? So, certain rabbis came out with letters saying that the ships run on autopilot the entire Shabbos, and since the ships run on autopilot the entire Shabbos, you do not have to worry, and you're allowed to go on those ships on Shabbos. When the Lubavitcher Rebbe heard this, he was not very happy, because, as we'll see, there's a letter the Rebbe wrote on the topic. The mitzvah of Sabbath observance that you write about is one of the most fundamental ones, and as the rabbis state in the Talmud, that the Sabbath equals in importance all the other mitzvahs combined. I mention this particularly in reference to your inquiry regarding the Sabbath desecration which is perpetrated by the Jewish ocean liners. The claim that everything is done automatically during the 24 hours of the Sabbath is absurd. And I state it with the fullest authority, being an engineer myself and having studied marine mechanics. And here comes the important point. The Rebbe once said about another topic, you have plenty of scientists that are weighing in on this topic, but they've never learned halacha. You have plenty of rabbis weighing on this topic, but they've never learned science. I have studied engineering and I've studied halacha, and I can tell you with authority how the thing works. And here you're seeing, so in the previous examples, you had rabbis that needed to turn to academics and experts from other areas because they didn't have the knowledge themselves. This is an interesting example where you have a rabbi who's trained as an engineer that can actually comment with authority from both perspectives on how the thing actually works. And he says it's absurd to think that this thing can run for 24 hours on autopilot. For one thing, certain machinery cannot be operated automatically, especially those connected with the steering, radio communication services, and similar ones. Secondly, even those machines which can operate automatically are required by their very operation, as well as by international law, to be checked periodically every few hours, which involves direct Sabbath desecration a corresponding number of times during the 24-hour period of the Sabbath. Thirdly, certain so-called automatic machines, including some of the boilers, require a change of parts periodically, approximately every 6 hours, when the affected sections of these machines are stopped and restarted for the said purpose. The water which is supplied, and it goes on to the water supply, needs to be done more than. So in the next paragraph, only one who has no conception of how such machines are operated can be made to believe the absurd claim that an ocean liner can, for 24 hours, be operated automatically without any Sabbath desecration. Unfortunately, there have been rabbis who have been misled and have misled others on the subject. In their ignorance of the technical aspects involved and under the influence of misleading statements by technicians who, for reasons of their own, did not choose to disclose all the facts, these rabbis have regretfully been misled into thinking or even declaring openly that no Sabbath desecration was here involved. So, Rachel, you asked the question earlier, why was it so important for the people not to know what's at stake? Because sometimes when the expert witnesses have a stake in the thing, they're not necessarily giving you all the information. So it's an interesting example over here of how what we've seen so far is rabbis that are turning to secular authorities and experts in a topic to get information they needed. And here you have a case of a rabbi who is aware both of Jewish law and secular dynamics and is able to bridge the two. So Shabbat elevators are automatically run, and therefore no Shabbos desecration has to happen. Now, it stops on every floor. That's the way they run. And the Rebbe is not saying that theoretically a ship that went on autopilot wouldn't be allowed. It might be allowed if it went on autopilot. But such a ship, he says, at that time was just not possible. It's probably not possible today. And you could deal with it because you could hire non-Jewish staff to be able to run the ship for you on Shabbos, and that would also work. But the issue that was upsetting the Rebbe is that the Jewish ocean liners were claiming to observe Shabbos when there was no way that they were actually doing it. And that's something he did not like that. If a non-Jewish person is running the ship, then under certain circumstances, one can be on that ship on Shabbos. The problem over here is that they were claiming, the issue over here is they were making claims that were just not true. And that's what the Rebbe had felt he needs to. And he needed an expert. He didn't in general, the Lubavitcher Rebbe did not get involved in halachic matters. He said, it's not my job to be that kind of rabbi. But here was a case where he felt he needed to weigh in because he was an engineer and rabbis were making claims without the facts. He felt, okay, this is an area I've got to get involved and bring my expertise. He actually worked, it's known that the Rebbe worked when he came to America in 1941, was during the war, and he spent his first 5 years working for the American Navy at the Brooklyn Naval Yard, where he apparently he was involved with designing electrical systems for ships. That was his job there. So he actually had real expertise on this matter and felt he needed to do all this. Okay, let's go back to the mikveh story, the Nile, the flooding of the Nile. So if you turn to page 65 in our books, you will see that there's a little table. The table says Mayan, which means a spring. Have you ever met a young lady named Mayan? It's quite a common Hebrew name. People call it Mayan, means a spring. And the laws of a mountain spring would be a kosher mikveh. If you know for sure that it's a natural spring from the depths of the earth and not a flowing river. If it's a flowing river, it can also become a kosher mikveh, but it has different rules, okay? But a mountain spring, something that's fed from a natural water source, if it's rainwater, it has a different rule, okay? So spring water, if it has a source in spring water, then that water is allowed to be flowing. Then the water is allowed to be flowing. If, however, it has its source in rains, then to make the mikveh kosher, you have to block off a immersion pool in which the water can flow into from the rain and remain stationary. Okay, why this is, we're not going to do today. Okay, we're not going to explain why today. It's beyond the spectrum of today's class. But those are the rules. Okay, so if it's a natural spring source, then it can be flowing. So what was happening in Egypt, as I said before, that's Michal calling. It's outside. I'm not sure what's going on. Okay, I've been given instructions. The call was a pocket call, so excuse me, but I was also received a message in future, ladies and gentlemen, when people come, please can everybody try to park on one side of the road. That makes it easier for whichever side the other cars are on.
Said on these functions, there was a sign you're supposed to.
It's probably better to park closer to the house on the side of the road if possible. So that's it's not a big deal. It doesn't matter. Ladies, it's really fine, but it's just that we.
First was gather. This is-
Okay, ladies and gentlemen,
Yeah.
Okay. it really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. It's not a big crowd here today. It's not a big deal. Okay, so let's talk about the mysterious mud ritual. Remember what do they call it? Groundhog Day. What's the name of that town? That's what exactly. So what in Egypt, here's what they would do. Page 65. They weighed the river mud on a designated night called Lelet al-Nukta. And according to the increase in the mud's weight on that night, the Nile will rise that year. This indicates that the increase is from the Nile's natural underground sources, not from rainwater. That's what people believed. So now the question is, what was happening is off the Nile, there was a canal called Khalij. It may still be there, I have no idea. Off the Nile, there was, if you look on the, no, it's not in the map. Off the Nile, there was a canal called the Khalij. It is on the map?
Yeah. Just south of the Jewish border.
Oh, so there you go. So now the question is, if the Nile has its source in a natural spring and the flooding comes, the Khalij was only filled during the flooding of the Nile. The Khalij only got its water during the flooding of the Nile. If it has its source in a spring, so then it would be a kosher mikveh. If it has its source in rainwater, then you need to block off an area to create an immersion pool in the Khalij, right? So people were claiming it's spring water, and therefore we don't need to build a separate mikveh there. Just go in it as it is. So Radvaz is now called upon to do this. So he has to consult with the leading authorities to figure out the source of the Nile and the flooding, and came to the conclusion, the very controversial opinion, that the flooding of the Nile is due to rainwater in Ethiopia, not because of a mysterious hidden spring underneath the river in Egypt. You asked me, so I'll inform you of my opinion. Is it permissible to immerse in the Khalij, a place that has no water throughout the year, but when the Nile rises, the water enters there and flows intensely? The question is whether it has the status of a mikveh, which means a rainwater gathering, or a maya in a spring. Tshuva, my answer. Generally, rivers swell due to the surface runoff from rain or melting snow, and it is said that this is also the case of the Nile. Its swelling is fed by the rains in Ethiopia. It is thus clear that one should not immerse it in the Khalij, because a mikveh only purifies with still waters. However, one way to make this work is to place barriers in the water, rendering the water between the barriers gathered and still, which makes it kosher for immersion. I have written what appears correct to me in my humble opinion. Yes, Skilla. Where in 65? It's the Hebrew, Lelet, Lel, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Ani lo yodea. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Good question. I don't know. We're going to look it up. Okay, so that's the story of the flooding of the Nile. What was with the heartless chicken? What a heartless chicken. The missing heart. So here's the story. It's a very interesting story. This story came up in Hamburg in 1709. Some say this is the origin of the hamburger. So this story came up in Hamburg in 1709. There was an incident involving a young girl who opened a slaughtered hen to remove its innards. She was standing at the edge of the table, and the cat was near her, waiting to eat anything that would be tossed to the ground. Wait. The girl claimed that she did not find a heart in the hen. She opened the chicken. There was no heart inside.
Open the cat. Open the cat.
The owner of the hen, her mother suggested that the heart certainly dropped to the ground and was eaten by the cat, which was ready and waiting to eat anything that fell. The girl insisted, however, that she only threw the spleen to the ground, not the heart. The hen was fat, healthy, and good, with no defect or rot in its innards, and there was no visible trace of a heart that had decayed or dissolved. Furthermore, when the hen was alive, it appeared strong and healthy. Yet the girl claimed that she could not find its heart. The case was brought to the students, and they ruled the chicken to be non-kosher. Before anyone could eat the chicken, they said it's not kosher. Because they said, obviously, if a chicken didn't have a heart, it's not a healthy bird. If a bird is not a healthy bird, it means that if it doesn't have a heart, it was going to die very soon. It was not a healthy bird, and therefore it's not kosher. A bird has to be in good health to be a kosher bird. It doesn't matter if it looked healthy, because if it didn't have a heart, it's by definition about to die. So therefore it's treif. Now, and that's how they ruled. The problem is, it's ludicrous. Okay? The problem is, wait. The problem is, it's ludicrous. Because obviously, everybody knows, obviously, this chicken had a heart. Okay? And if it didn't have a heart, it wouldn't have lived so long. So there's two possibilities of what happened over here. Either the chicken had a heart. So there's three possibilities. Firstly, we have to get categorical. These students are under the impression that it's possible for a chicken to live without a heart. Now, how do you know a chicken can't live without a heart? What if they found one? This girl found a chicken without a heart. She found a chicken. She's screaming up the kazoo. We had a healthy chicken here and it didn't have a heart. So you're explaining why. So one second. There's a in 2026, somebody, a young girl said something. We have to believe her. I don't mean to be controversial here, but I'm in big trouble over here, right? But the point is, what are you saying? We're not going to believe her. Maybe she's telling the truth. So they come to the rabbis. Now the rabbi says, okay, she says it didn't have a heart. So what you have over here is a conflict. Now, I shouldn't have said what I said before. Obviously, people are saying impossible things. But the point is, the theoretical concept here, okay, the theoretical concept over here is, how do you know a chicken? Maybe the chicken didn't have a heart. So the rabbis ruled, probably she's swearing the chicken didn't have a heart. Believe her, and it's not kosher. Meanwhile, a long time later, Rabbi Yonasan Eibschitz heard the story, and he says, that's crazy. So he says, we're going to put this matter to rest, and I'm going to prove to you a chicken can't live with this chicken had a heart. So he calls the he sends a message to the leading medical experts, can a chicken live without a heart? And they're going to answer, what do you think they're going to answer? They're going to answer, no, a chicken can't live without a heart. But one second, he puts a second question to that. Is it theoretically possible that another limb in the body could have taken the place of a heart? Could it possibly be that another limb of the body took the place of the heart? So, and if the answer to that is yes, then maybe the chicken didn't have a heart, but a bird that was living without a heart, by Jewish law, would still be considered not kosher. So that's what he really wants to know. So what do they answer? Let's go back and see. What did they answer, these professors? On page 54, we said, regarding the second question, if a bird such as a chicken or a goose is opened and no heart is found, can we assume that another organ has developed in the place of the heart, performing its function, thereby sustaining the bird's life despite the absence of its heart? So they're going to say, I guess, I don't know what they say, but we have it at the back over here. We're going to see it in a second. We have it at the back. We have the full text at the back of the book. So page 95, he wrote, this is what they wrote to him. This is from the professors of the university, page 95. Have received 2 inquiries, the reason for which we do not know, we were asked, blah, blah, blah. The first question is whether any living can survive for some time after its heart is removed. First, obviously not. Regarding the second question, page 97, if a bird such as a chicken or goose is opened and no heart is found, can we assume that another organ has developed in its place? And they say it is physiologically impossible for any living being, whether bird or animal, to survive without a heart, or at the very least, an organ or living tissue with the same structure and function as a heart. That is, it must contain a cavity, veins, etc. If another organ exists in its place, resembling the heart in structure, meaning it has 2 chambers, then it is indeed possible for such an animal or bird to survive for an extended period. This remains true even if the organ does not resemble the heart. So the bottom line is like this. Basically, they say it either has to have a heart or an artificial heart. And in this case, you didn't find an artificial heart, so the cat must have eaten it. And therefore, he rules that this chicken should have been kosher. Why is this important? This question became super important in the end of the 20th century about artificial hearts. Should an artificial heart have the same rule as a real heart? And that rule becomes very important in determining whether somebody is alive or dead in end-of-life issues. So this story about a little girl who claimed, obviously the cat ate the heart, but what's at stake here is still reverberating in end-of-life questions in 21st century. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I want to go. We got to keep moving. We'll come back to questions at the end. The clock is ticking. It's already 11:12. We have another 18 minutes for today's class. We've got a lot of material to cover. So we will take more questions, but I just want to move things along a little bit longer, and then we'll take more questions, okay? What was the story with the Cypriot chicken? Page 70. There's a rule in Jewish law: one should not eat any bird unless there is a received tradition that it is kosher. The Torah lists all the birds that are not kosher. Now comes, so does that mean you can eat everything else? So Jewish law rules that in order to eat a bird, you have to have a tradition that it's a kosher bird. The issue was that Cypriot chickens were a little bigger than European chickens. They were bigger. They weren't as big as turkeys necessarily, but they looked different. They were just bigger and more bulky, and no one ever saw a chicken like this. And a new bird, because of advances in transportation, they were now able to bring these bigger birds from Cyprus into Europe. And you have this new bird on the market, and everybody wants this new bigger bird. It's not a turkey. It was going to be another question with turkeys later. We're going to deal with turkeys. I don't know if we're going to deal with it in this course or not, but we're going to deal with the issue of turkeys that came from the New World. So that's a whole nother question. But the question was the Cypriot chicken, is this a kosher bird or not? So what they'll end up doing is he lands up traveling to Izmir in Turkey, where they've been eating these birds for centuries. This is the bird they eat. This is their chicken. He's now able to bring this bird back to his grandfather-in-law in Europe and say to him, or in Central Europe, and say to him, look, these are the Jewish community in Izmir has been eating these birds, so the Tzanzer Hasidim in Austria-Hungary can eat these birds too. And you see this, right? The search for how modern technology brings up all these new questions. Yes.
So, go back the other way, and was surviving because of different moral assumption as the heart. That's like an artificial heart. Would it then be kosher or not kosher?
That becomes the interesting question. Okay. I'm not going to, let's go beyond books. So just going back to the slideshow for a little bit, ladies and gentlemen. So firstly, beyond books. We said that a rabbi sometimes must thoroughly understand the practical situation of the question. It's not always only about the books. There's also very important things we learn. The classic story they tell everybody in rabbinical school is about the person who came to the rabbi and said, Rabbi, I have a question for Passover. I can't afford wine this year. Am I allowed to fulfill the obligation by having 4 cups of milk? And the rabbi turns to the person who asked the question and says, thank you for that question. It's such a difficult question. I need to really think about it. I'll get back to you tomorrow. And the person leaves the room. And the rabbi's student who's sitting there says to the rabbi, what's going on? He says, here's $500. Do me a favor, please. Go leave it in their mailbox. And the student says, what's going on? He says, think about it. If they're having milk for the Passover Seder, it means they can't afford meat, right? And they can't afford wine. It means they don't have any food. This isn't a question about milk for the Seder. This is about a poor family that doesn't have enough money for what they need to do. So the importance of looking deeper at the situation and not only looking at the stupid students in Hamburg, whoever they were, heard a story about a chicken without a thing and ruled that if a chicken didn't have a heart, it's obviously not kosher. When the rabbi came along later and says, think about it, guys, the chicken had a heart. Now we're going to establish for you for all time by going to the medical authorities that this chicken had a heart, right? That's really what's going on in this question. Okay, not yet. Question soon. We're talking about the ships, people traveling to Israel did so by ocean liner using the national carrier Tzim. You'll still see Tzim ships, by the way, the containers all around. Still a shipping company. Today, they don't do passenger lines, only shipping. The trip from America to Israel was over Shabbat, and the ship operators were mostly Jews. And this is where the question came from. Can Tzim ships travel on Shabbos? A lack of marine expertise misled rabbis to assume ships could run automatically. The Rebbe, drawing on engineering experience, refuted their assumptions. The story of the Khalij was a canal off the Nile filled with water each summer. For the Jews living nearby, it presented an opportunity for immersion. It came down to whether it was a mayan or a mikveh, a spring or a gathering of natural water. And we said it's got to do with the Nile's rise. And the Khalij was determined to be rainwater, and it was disqualified for immersion while flowing. Sealing off a section created a stationary kosher area for immersion. The story with the kosher chicken, ritual animal slaughter, a tray, okay. The absence of a vital organ renders an animal a treifa. Can living creatures survive without a heart? No, the chicken is classified as kosher. Can another organ take over the function of the heart? Yes. If another organ could take over, the law would be that a chicken is still considered a treifa. In other words, even if another limb took over the heart, the chicken would still not be kosher. That's how Rabbi Yonasan Eibschitz ruled in this matter. Because he said it's not really a healthy chicken if another limb is taken over from the heart. It needs a heart. Okay. Absolutely. Anything to save lives, yes. A response to 2 questions from the Jewish community has been concerning the circumstances of Jewish kosher slaughter. This was the issue of the birds. The Torah lists 24 non-kosher species. In order to eat a kosher bird, we need a reliable tradition that it's actually a kosher bird. So the question was, this new bird, is it disqualified? Was it an interbred thing? Is it a real thing? No one knew. So they had to go all the way to Cyprus, to Izmir in Turkey to find a bird tradition. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we come up with the last case of today's discussion. This is a very interesting one, a little morbid, ladies and gentlemen. It's got to do with being buried alive. You don't want to do that. You know, they tell the story, the rabbi, the priest, and the minister were having a discussion of what they once said at their funeral. The minister says, I hope they'll say that I was a good man. The priest says, I hope they'll say that I was faithful to God. And the rabbi says, I hope they'll say, wait, he's moving. Okay. Can you hear?
Death is certain.
Can you hear this at home?
But
Can you hear it at home? Okay, go.
also uncertain, since its diagnosis is sometimes fallible. So warned Jacob B. Winslow, the Danish-born anatomist who lit the spark of one of the strangest fears, the terror of being buried alive. In 1740, Winslow published a Latin thesis arguing that no breath, no pulse, and no sign of life weren't enough. Vast numbers of persons that have been too soon interred, he wrote, probably call aloud from their graves for a due vengeance on those who have barbarously exposed them to a violent death. He insisted only visible decay could confirm death. Anything else was guesswork. Jacques-Jean Bruyère translated Winslow's thesis into French, sensationalized it, and added pages of blood-curdling tales. One of his most infamous, Madame Rousseau. Declared dead, she was sliced with leeches just to make sure. She revived, lived, and gave birth to 26 children, one for each cut. Bruyère's book stirred mass hysteria. Wills composed in Paris reflect the panic. Early in the 18th century, almost none mentioned premature burial precautions. But between 1760 and 1777, nearly 50 out of 1,000 did. German cities responded with institutions where corpses were laid out to rot before burial. The most famous, the Munich Leichenhaus, or corpse house, where fingers and toes were tied to bells and harmoniums. If a body moved, the music would sound and a sentry would rush in. The harmoniums rang often, not because the dead came back to life, but because swelling from decay triggered the mechanism. Over many decades, not a single revival was documented in any German Leichenhaus. Another response to the fear was the security coffin. In 1792, Duke Ferdinand of Brunswick commissioned one with windows, air holes, and a lock and key. Later models featured ladders, lights, even telephones to call for help from beneath the ground. Over 30 versions were patented in Germany in the latter half of the 19th century. The panic led some governments to mandate waiting periods before burial. In 1772, the Duke of Mecklenburg passed a law requiring that no one be buried until 3 days after death. For Jews, this created a crisis, as Torah law demands immediate burial. When they objected, the Duke insisted on receiving rabbinic letters declaring the delay to be forbidden by the Torah, which the community did eventually procure. Looking back, we know the widespread fear of premature burial was unfounded. While there have been isolated cases throughout history of people being buried alive, it was never a pervasive problem. But in that moment, it was a story of deep tension between a people commanded to honor the dead by burying swiftly and a world terrified of burying too soon.
So in our previous cases, we had rabbis turning to scientists to find out anatomy and geography and other things to try to figure out, to go to the experts. In this case, the experts were crazy. The experts had become kooky. So what do you do when the experts go kooky? So sometimes the answer can be found in sometimes the answer is actually in Jewish law explicitly, and you don't need to listen to all the noise out there. So if you look at, this question came in front of Rabbi Yaakov Emden, who was actually he was actually a contemporary of Rabbi Yonasan Eibschitz with a heart issue. So it's very interesting. But anyway, that's a whole fascinating story we'll deal another day. Page 72, though. How do you know the moment of death according to Jewish law? So this also, by the way, comes up again in the 20th century with machinery and, and that kind of thing, end of life moments. But it's a whole nother story. We're not going to go there today. But classical definition of end of life in Jewish law. So that we have a story in the Talmud addresses that it's in Jewish law. If someone is trapped under collapsed debris on Shabbos, and there is uncertainty whether they are alive or dead, or even whether they are there or not, we clear the debris to check despite the multiple layers of uncertainty. Even though you can't really clear debris on Shabbos, we'll clear the debris on Shabbos because maybe somebody's alive. Even if they are found severely crushed and can only survive for a short time, we continue clearing until reaching their nose. If no signs of life are detected at the nose, they are confirmed as deceased. In other words, we don't worry about bells on the fingers. We look and see if the person's breathing. If the upper victims are found dead, one should not say the lower ones are certainly dead as well. Rather, the debris should be cleared because it's possible somebody is alive. So what do we see from this? So Rabbi Yaakov Emden, based on this, page 73 at the bottom of the page, during the crisis he's the rabbi of one of those communities he's a rabbi in Emden in Germany, not too far from Yonasan Eibschitz. The two of them had a very complicated relationship, let's say. It's a nice way of saying it. The sages were extremely careful about saving lives. Indeed, it was well known they did not follow the majority in such cases. They stated that even if the upper victims are found dead, we still clear the debris and desecrate Shabbos out of doubt. Nonetheless, they also said that we suffice with checking the nose. They based this ruling on the verse, everything that had the breath of life in its nostrils, indicating that if there is no sign of life detected in the nostrils, it is known that the individual has died and there's no longer any concern for saving a life. From this, you learn that there is no substance here to the words of those who are devoid of Torah knowledge. Let my son not follow their approach. One who has faith will not be concerned about uncertainties arising from unreliable assessments and baseless conjectures. I don't care what the experts are telling me. Death is when the person stops breathing, and this business of people supposedly being alive for days is a bunch of nonsense. And he ruled that this is how it should be dealt with. So it's just an interesting case. Any questions or comments?
What happened where they were not the full rule or
I think to the best of their ability, they try to bury as quickly as they could, but where they couldn't, they couldn't. I think they try to do it. To the best of their ability, they tried to do immediate burials and not follow the approach that was mandated.
That's a general question about kashrut. So does an animal that missing an organ, or the organ was operated on, is considered
A vital organ. If an animal's missing a vital organ, it's not kosher.
what is the vital?
A heart, a brain.
What about the leg?
Then it's not necessarily not kosher. It could be kosher.
And what if it
It could be. So here, I'll tell you where it becomes interesting. One of the things with kosher, after an animal is slaughtered, they check the lungs of the animal to see if it is a healthy lung. If the lung is healthy, then it gets sold as kosher meat. If the lung was not healthy, then they send it to the butchery down the road and they sell it as non-kosher meat. So actually, kosher meat has healthier animals than non-kosher
that's the only
meat.
thing they look at, the lungs?
One of the things they look at is the lungs. Okay, let me, before we go, Gilo, in a minute, just before, 1 second, just 1 second, ladies and gentlemen. One more point over here, or a few more points. So can we wait 3 days to bury the dead was a question that came up. The Torah provides precise criteria for determining death, the absence of responsiveness and breathing. Ladies and gentlemen, if we look a little deeper or spiritually into the story over here today, what we're seeing is the interplay between Torah knowledge and physical reality. And the rabbi's efforts to align Torah ideas with contemporary expertise in science. There are, you have, unfortunately, you have some people that say, well, Torah is everything, we don't need science. You have some people say we need science is everything, what do we need Torah? And obviously Judaism is about bringing heaven down to earth and bringing earth up to the heaven. And true Jewish spiritual living is about creating the bridge, the marriage, the partnership between that below, between the heavens above and the earth below. The heavens above and the earth below. What we're seeing in this rabbinic response that we're looking at today is the capacity to bridge these different approaches and find harmony and synchronicity between them in the most beautiful and profound way, which is a lesson for us in our lives, ladies and gentlemen, about the importance of bringing spirituality into the earthly areas of our lives and elevating the more earthly elements of our lives with spirituality. And that's, of course, part of the central rabbinic process and thinking that is at the core of today's class. We're going to watch a little thing now about the key points of today's class. And then if anyone has any more questions, we'll take more questions. So the physical is a vehicle to express the spiritual in Jewish thinking.
Lesson 2. Torah in the Trenches. 1. The Talmud emphasizes that divine assistance plays a key role in guiding a rabbi to the correct halachic ruling. Thus, a rabbi's spiritual integrity alongside academic excellence is essential for providing halachic counsel. 2. A rabbi must thoroughly explore the details of a question, often venturing beyond the study hall to learn about niche or obscure topics. Applying halachic text to real-world investigations reflects the Torah's mission of uniting the physical and the spiritual. 3. In the 16th century, Rabbi David ibn Zimra investigated the origins of the Nile's annual inundation to determine whether a canal that ran through Cairo was suitable for ritual immersion. He sought expert testimony and rejected popular local myths about the Nile's rise. 4. In the 18th century, to rule on its kosher status, Rabbi Yonatan Eibeshitz consulted professors on whether a hen without a heart could survive. 5. In the 19th century, Rabbi Naftali Chaim Horowitz traveled extensively to investigate a chicken breed that had recently been imported to Galicia, seeking a Jewish community that had a living tradition that the breed was kosher. 6. In the 20th century, the Lubavitcher Rebbe used his engineering expertise to address the halachic question about Israeli ocean liners operating on Shabbat. 7. In the 18th century, rabbis rejected widespread fears of premature burial. Since the Code of Jewish Law provides clear criteria for diagnosing death, they relied on Torah guidance over popular uncertainty. This approach was eventually vindicated as the myth of premature burial was debunked.
Ladies and gentlemen, next week we will talk about how past rulings are applied to new realities. If anyone has any last questions or comments before we call it a day. Yes, Gila.
That the burden is social, so they say receive tradition, who started that tradition?
So that's a very interesting question. So we don't know. But what they saw was that there was a living Jewish community in Turkey that was eating these birds as Jewish birds. That's enough to know that traditionally this is a kosher bird. That's the whole point, is we what do you mean? Then they wouldn't eat it.
That's the kind of chickens they have, it has to have, chickens.
The whole point is there's no sign on the bird. We don't look at the bird, we look at the thing. The question became a real complicated question when the turkey arrived from the Americas. And most rabbis came to the conclusion that a turkey is pretty much the same thing as a chicken, and therefore it should be considered a kosher bird. There was famously one of the rabbis that did not accept the turkey as a kosher bird was Rabbi Yeshayahu Alevi Horowitz, known as the Shaloh. And I have friends that are descendants of the Shaloh, and in their family, they still don't eat turkeys to this day because they have this tradition that there's no proper tradition about this bird.
You know the story of the three-legged chicken? President Reagan?
Right, but Rachel had a question first before you tell her. I know the story.
They were eating on Shabbos, so there were circumstances where that wouldn't be considered traveling, because this is, unless I'm confused, isn't that a halacha that you're not supposed to travel?
So one can be on a ship run by non-Jews on Shabbos. Amongst the rules are that you have to be on the ship before Shabbos, and you can't get off the ship until after Shabbos. You have to be on the ship for the whole 24-hour period of this. And in fact, I believe you even have to get onto the boat on a Wednesday. You can't get onto a boat on a Friday. You have to be on that ship from the Wednesday before, and then you're already, and exactly how that works, I don't have all the info at my fingertips this minute. I've never actually been on a ship on Shabbos, so I don't know, but I do know that if you go online and Google Shabbos observance on a cruise ship, they have websites that with very detailed instructions on how you can take cruise ships on Shabbos in a halachically permissible way.
Maybe that contributed to the question is, there are some Orthodox people who even if a non-Jew is driving a car, they won't sit in the car.
Because again, there's a difference. If you wanted to apply it to a car, and I don't know if you can, but if you wanted to apply it to a car, you would probably have to talk about a car that a person's getting into on Wednesday and not getting off until after Shabbos. So that would be the similarity to the ship situation, if they can be compared. I don't know if they fully can be compared or not, because I've never really done a thorough analysis on the difference between a ship and a car in terms of Jewish law. I've never done it, but I can tell you it's obvious in this case that it would be, that's one of the issues that we would I haven't done a thorough analysis, but it's possible that if you wanted to go to Mars on a rocket ship, and if it left on a Wednesday and is going to keep traveling, and non-Jews are operating the thing, and you're going to be on there for long enough, and you're not going to get off on Shabbos, it's possible under those circumstances that you might be allowed to get onto that rocket ship to Mars. I would even venture to say that it's probably going to be allowed, but I don't know enough about it. We've got to look into it. You have lots of Jewish people that do lots of things. The question isn't what do Jewish people do. The question is what does Torah and Halacha say should be done. It's a very, very different question. That's true. There was. Yeah. You know, these questions came up. These questions.
Every day. And you're around the earth for 90 minutes, second to October every 90 minutes. You base your time on where you live. Jerusalem. I did want to say about the three-legged chicken.
Okay, Jerry, we're going to end with a story. Ladies and gentlemen, Jerry, we're going to end with a story from Jerry Benstock.
It's a similar thing, but President Reagan tells the story, man's driving down the road and looks at and he's driving at 30, 40 miles, and it's a chicken running along the side of the car. That's amazing. And he speeds up to 50, the chicken's running with it. 60, the chicken's keeping up with him. He can't believe it. The chicken veers off into a farm and runs into the barn. And the guy, I have to check this out. He drives into the barn. There's a farmer there. And he says to the farmer, I just saw this chicken. Like, yeah, we got these chickens. He says, what is this? Well, it's a 3-legged chicken. He says, well, I like drumsticks and my wife likes drumsticks. My son likes drumsticks. So we bred a 3-legged chicken so we can each get a drumstick. He says, what does it taste like? I said, I don't know. We never caught one.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, everybody, for coming today. It's great to see
President
you,
Reagan.
and hope to see you again next week for the class. Thank you very, very much. We'll see you, Bob. All the best.
Thank you.